at the Entomology and Nematology Department at the University of Florida. And today I'm going to teach you about butterflies. And this butterfly here actually is the state butterfly of Florida. It's the zebra longwing. And if you have passion flower growing in your backyard, the adults will lay their eggs on it and the larvae will eat that passion flower. So don't be killing those larvae, because that's the state butterfly. So first we're going to start off with a sort of a sample specimen. So imagine you're out in the field and you've collected this creature and you want to figure out what it is. So what biologists will do is first they'll study their creature and they'll maybe make some notes about it. So on our creature we'll notice it has 6 legs. We count the legs. It's got 3 different body regions. Looks like it's got a head, a middle body region, a thorax, and an abdomen. And it has 2 pairs of wings, so 4 wings total. It's got this kind of hard, crunchy outside skeleton. It doesn't seem like it has a backbone. It's cold-blooded, sort of like a reptile. It's got scales on its wings. And so just make observations of your creature once you've caught it. And so now we're going to go through the different kingdoms of organisms, and we're going to try to place this creature that we've just collected. So we know it's a large creature. It's composed of many cells, so we can rule out the bacteria there. And it's also not a photosynthetic organism, meaning it takes in sunlight and makes its own energy. So it's not here, it's not the algae, and we know it's not a plant. It is not a fungus either. So that leaves us here with the animal kingdom, sort of represented by our Florida gator. So now we'll look at the different phyla within the animal kingdom and try to place this creature within them. So far we know it doesn't have a backbone and it's not warm-blooded. So we could cross out the mammals represented by the lion. We know it's not warm-blooded and it doesn't have a backbone, so it's not a bird. How about a fish? Fish have backbones, so it's not a fish and it's definitely not a reptile, represented now by our gator. Cross out the fish there. And so I said this insect has an exoskeleton, or this organism has an exoskeleton, and a snail sort of has that hard outer shell. But we also noticed that our organism had legs, and snails don't have legs. So we'll cross out the mollusks there. So what's left? We've got the earthworm, the starfish, and the crawfish there. So we'll cross out the starfish because it doesn't, the organism, it doesn't live underwater, and it doesn't have radial symmetry like the starfish does. So it doesn't have sort of different legs coming out from a center point. So it's not an earthworm, although the earthworm kind of has different body sections. The earthworm doesn't have that hard outer skeleton. So now we're left here with the arthropods, which is represented by this crawdad. It's got that hard outer skeleton. It's got legs that are kind of jointed and have that skeleton on them as well. So within the arthropods, looks like we're getting a little closer to what we think our organism is. So we said our organism has 6 legs. It's definitely not the centipede. The centipede has way more than 6 legs. It's definitely not the crawdad. The crawdad has far more than 6 legs. It actually has 10 legs. So mites or arachnids, they have 8 legs. So we can also cross out the tarantula, representing another group of arachnids. So we're left here with this organism here. So this is a wasp, and it's in the class Insecta. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legs. It also has wings. None of the other arthropods have wings. And then the insects have 2 antennae. None of the arachnids have antennae, and the crustaceans actually have 4 antennae. So finally we've made it. We've gone through the different kingdoms, the different phyla, the different classes, and now we come to, within the class Insecta, the order Lepidoptera. So Lepidoptera translated means scaled wing. Remember earlier we noticed our creature had a lot of scales on the wings? It also had 4 wings. So on this figure down here we have 1, 2, the 2 forewings, F-O-R wings, and then 1, 2, the 2 hind wings, and that total makes 4 F-O-U-R wings. And so we also have this butterfly here and the moth over here. Speaking of butterfly and moth, they're both Lepidoptera, But how would you tell the difference between them if you caught a lepidopteran? Well, first of all, you definitely want to look at the antenna. The color, let me tell you this now, the color is not always a guarantee that you're going to have a butterfly if you have bright colors, or if you have dull colors, you'll have a moth. What it is the antennae. That's what you want to look for. So here on this little skipper butterfly, you'll notice that the butterfly has a clubbed antenna. So it's very long and slender, and then at the tip it swells out, so sort of like a little fist or a club at the tip. And moth antennae, on the other hand, you're probably familiar with the Luna moth that's got the plumose, very feathery antenna, but other moths can have an antenna that's just like a little thin wire, like this noctuid moth down here, and you'll notice it doesn't have that club on the tip. So that's the way you can tell the difference between a butterfly and a moth. So, pop quiz. Here we've got an insect, a lepidopteran. It's kind of dull colored, but what do you think it is? Let's take a look here. It's got a long, slender antenna. It's got the club on the tip, so right away that kind of gives it away that it's a butterfly, but it's a dull color. Another thing I failed to mention is that most butterflies, when they rest, their wings are up like this. So this one here, its wings are resting a bit differently. Its wings are kind of more or less tent-like over its body while it's sitting there. And also notice it's got these feathery antennae. So this one would be a moth. So now here's the stumper. What's this one here? This one's very bright and colorful. Its wings are laying out flat, but some butterflies will also, instead of sitting like this, will open their wings out flat. But butterflies don't usually fold their wings back over their body. And also notice the antennae here. They're a long, thin wire, and they don't have that club at the end. So this one here is actually a moth. And there's a lot of moths that look very much like butterflies, especially in the tropics. And there's also a lot of moths that fly during the day. So now we'll move into some butterfly structures. We won't be focusing on moths at all anymore here, although we might look at some moth larvae a little bit later. The adult butterfly, they have compound eyes and a proboscis. So this little funny picture here of a man with a bunch of googly eyes glued onto some big glasses is sort of representing that compound eye. It's a structure that has a whole bunch of little lenses, and each one of those lenses takes in light from a different area, and it all combines it to make an image. Sort of like a digital camera with megapixels. So here is the butterfly's proboscis. It's a long tube-like structure, and so I have a little prop here that's sort of my model proboscis. Just a simple party toy, and the proboscis can be uncurled, and it's basically like a hose, and then the butterfly dips that into a liquid food source, and it drinks it up, and then when it's flying, it can retract its proboscis so it's not dangling around. So the larvae are a little bit different. I've got some larvae here, and as you can see, they look nothing like a butterfly or a moth. They're sort of these big, squishy feeding bags. They basically just eat and eat and eat and eat. And here's some poop that they are producing. And so they have mandibles, which are chewing mouth parts. And I've got a pair of pliers here, which is sort of representative of the mandibles. They have a side-to-side chewing motion, and they're good at tearing through tough leaves and solid foods. Maybe the flower, or some even feed on fruits. And so prolegs, what are those? On these caterpillars here, it's kind of hard to see from far away, but you'll notice it's gripping on to the plant very, very well. You want to go ahead and take a closer look at these prolegs. They're right, that's connected to the stick. And you can see they're kind of along the length of the body. I just lifted one of the prolegs off there. And they're not actually true legs. These legs won't be going through to be anything on the butterfly. So now the caterpillar's backing up. It doesn't like being touched. And those prolegs are real grippy. If you've ever picked up a big giant caterpillar, held it on your finger, and then tried to pull it off, it's like Velcro. So they help that caterpillar to hang on to the plant. But once the caterpillar turns into a pupa and a butterfly, the butterfly won't have these prolegs anymore. Caterpillars also have silk glands. You guys ever heard of a cocoon? Well, that's what the caterpillar will make a lot of times. It's basically like a sleeping bag or a mummy's case, and that protects the pupa inside, and we'll learn about that a little bit later. So we have a picture here. You can see the mandibles chewing up a leaf, and you can see the prolegs on this looper, because it kind of makes a loop with its body. You can see the prolegs in the back gripping the leaf. So this brings us to the way the butterfly grows. All insects need to shed that exoskeleton in order to grow, but some insects grow at different ways. And so we saw our caterpillars here look nothing like our adults. And so they have to go through what's called a metamorphosis. And in the case of butterflies and moths, they do a complete metamorphosis, or a holometabolous if you want to be a little more technical. So that goes, I'll erase the arrows there, and the question marks. We start out as the egg that the adult lays, and then we go to the larva, which feeds with its mandibles on the vegetation, and then we'll go over to the pupa, which is where a lot of the change is occurring, and out of the pupa comes the adult here. And then the adult feeds on nectar with its completely different mouth part, and it looks, these two look nothing alike. It's a complete change or metamorphosis. So we'll start out a little more detail with the egg. So here we have different pictures of eggs. You can see they're different shapes. Even the egg is different between different types of butterflies. So I like to pose the question, where would the mother butterfly like to lay her eggs? She wouldn't want to just lay them anywhere. A lot of butterflies and moths are specialists. That means they only feed on maybe one or two types of plants. So the mother butterfly would want to find that correct plant to lay her eggs. And so what about one at a time versus a whole bunch? Here we got a single egg, and here we've got, 20 or 30 eggs. It depends on the way the butterfly chooses its plant. The butterfly is choosing a plant that's very small. It wouldn't be very wise for her to lay 20 eggs on that plant, because when the larvae hatch, they'd eat the plant and there wouldn't be enough for all of them. However, some butterflies, they feed on trees, and so the butterfly will lay 100 eggs on that tree with the hopes that enough of the larvae will make it through. And butterflies that lay single eggs, they'll lay several dozen, maybe 100 eggs in the course of their life, but just one at a time. So the egg hatches. A lot of times the larva will eat its eggshell for that extra protein before it starts feeding on the leaves. And so we've talked about the mandibles. The larvae use those mandibles to eat solid foods. Most larvae are herbivores, but there are very few special cases where some species of larvae will eat other things, so they'll be carnivores, and those are pretty unusual. And so we talked about the molting and how they grow bigger. You can see here a monarch caterpillar sort of crawling out of its old shell, its old exoskeleton, and it's a little bit grayer, less colorful, this section in the back, and it sort of just crawls out of it like a sock. And it's pretty tough for a lot of insects, and one of our caterpillars is escaping here. I'll rescue it. And so the larva, here's some pictures of various kinds of larvae, and again, I'm kind of including moths again. And so we'll look at this first group of tent caterpillars here, and these guys feed together. It's called gregarious feeding. So they're kind of like a school of fish. They're feeding in this big group, and they make this silken tent that they all hide in, and that protects them from predators and parasitoids. So these guys will be feeding together in trees, and that's how they defend themselves. This one up here with the sort of fleshy orange antenna looking things, it has bright colors to kind of warn predators that it's poisonous or distasteful, and those fleshy little antennae are actually kind of scented, and they smell really bad. So a bird going to peck at this caterpillar is going to see that and go, oof, I don't want to eat that. And how about this stick right here? Wait a minute, that's not a stick. That's a caterpillar pretending to be a stick. So you can camouflage and not be seen. It's another way to defend yourselves. How about this piece of bird poop here? Wait a minute, that's not bird poop. That's a caterpillar. So you could pretend to look like something else that you wouldn't want to eat. Not many things would want to eat some bird poop. Speaking of pretending, the snake here looks pretty scary. Wait a minute, that's not a snake. That's a caterpillar with these patterns on its body that look like eyes. So it looks a lot like a big scary snake. Then there's this prickly caterpillar here. This one's actually poisonous. In those spines, they get in you, and they kind of inject a toxin in you, and it hurts. It burns. So you don't want to touch these prickly caterpillars, and that's how they're defending themselves. And the caterpillar fell down again. So next, the caterpillar eats, it gets to its maximum size, and then you get to the pupa. So the caterpillar sheds its exoskeleton one last time, and then it looks, it's still long and tubular, sort of like the caterpillar, but it doesn't have any kind of functioning mouth parts right now. And so the pupa does not eat. But is the pupa really a resting stage? Not really. Remember I mentioned that change from that caterpillar to the butterfly. A lot is going on right now inside of this pupa. All those parts are rearranging. These plier, mandible-type mouth parts are rearranging to become this hollow tube. The wings are growing inside. And so there's a lot going on in here. And so metamorphosis, huge change. And so this little diagram here will show when the butterfly is ready, you can almost see the butterfly through the shell of the pupa. And then it splits, the butterfly crawls out, its wings are still soft and wrinkled and kind of clumped together, and it pumps its blood through the wings, and eventually gravity and that force kind of causes the wings to stretch, and then they dry and harden, and the butterfly is ready to fly around. So the adults, that proboscis that they have, they feed on liquids. So nectar is probably the most common food that butterflies will feed on. Some of them will sip mud off of like stream banks, and they're getting nutrients from the mud. Others feed on rotting fruit or tree sap, and some butterflies will even land on poop and drink the juices off of the poop. So the butterflies aren't all pretty and smell good from the flowers. They can be kind of gross too. So, but since nectar is the primary food source, why wouldn't a butterfly live very long on nectar? Well, it's because nectar is basically just sugar. It's missing a lot of the nutrients, and protein is the key thing it's missing. So that's why most butterflies don't live all that long, maybe a few weeks. The monarchs can live a few months. Some tropical butterflies can actually eat pollen, which has protein, and they can live a little bit longer. So now the adult. How would the adult defend itself? Well, you'll notice it's got a lot of the same tactics or strategies that the larva has. So this dead leaf, is actually a butterfly with its wings folded up, and it's sitting on the twig, and so it's mimicking a leaf very well. This guy here is called a hair streak, and this one kind of tries to confuse predators. So in the back of its wing here, it has eye spots and little fake antennae. So a lot of birds will think that the head is actually back here and go to attack that, and the butterfly just has a piece of its wing missing. It's still alive, it can still fly around. The monarch here has bright warning colors, the orange and black and white all combined together, that tell predators that, hey, this thing's poisonous or it tastes really bad, don't eat it. This buckeye here has the eye spots, and eye spots are thought to kind of frighten predators. When they all of a sudden open their wings and see those eyes, the predator might be startled and run off, or give the butterfly a chance to fly away. And then this type of moth is actually oozing a type of nasty, almost poison-like substance out of its body that when something eats it, will spit it out right away. So mimicry, that basically means copying. So we talked about pretending to look like something else with the caterpillars and then the butterflies. So some butterflies will copy each other. So in the first one, this one here is called the red-spotted purple. It's in a different family than the one on the left, or the pipevine swallowtail. And the pipevine swallowtail is actually toxic because of the plant it eats. So this red-spotted purple is pretending to look like the pipevine swallowtail, even though the red-spotted purple actually isn't poisonous. Same below here. Can you tell the difference between these two? They look both like monarchs, don't they? In this case, the one on the left is called the viceroy, and it's pretending to look like the monarch. So they do a pretty good job at mimicking each other. So now we'll talk a little bit, speaking of the monarch, we'll talk a little bit about migration. So why would you want to migrate? Well, there's a few reasons for that. One, in the north, it starts getting really cold in the winter. And so if you're a cold-blooded insect and it's cold, you're not going to be able to move around. Also, if you're feeding on plants and your plant can't take the cold, you're not going to have any food in the winter. So the monarchs will migrate south to where it's warmer and where they still have their food plant. So what else can you do if you're not going to migrate and you're going to stay in the area? Well, if it's cold and you don't have any food, you can sort of hibernate like a bear, And so a lot of insects will actually go through a sort of hibernation-like state until conditions improve and they have what they need to survive. So now we'll talk about making more butterflies. So if you remember, the adult stage is the stage that lays the egg. It's the stage that reproduces. And some butterflies, the boy and the girl butterfly, look very, very similar. In other cases, they don't look similar at all. So what about these top two here? Would you say that those two are the same species, boy and girl? Well, actually, they are. The one on the left is the boy, and the one on the right is the girl. So they're completely different looking from each other, but they're the same species, and then they make more butterflies. So these two up down here, the boy and the girl, these ones look a lot, very, very similar. And this one here, it's got a little like white patch on the end of its abdomen, and that's sort of like a wedding ring. The boy butterfly will give that one to the female here, and that means they're sort of almost like partners. So why are Lepidoptera butterflies and moths important? We're going to just wrap it up right here. Well, for one, pollination. A lot of the foods we eat require pollination. So the pollen from one flower goes to another flower, and then that flower gets fertilized, and then the fruit will develop that we need to eat. Also in our gardens, pollination helps the flowers to produce seeds. A lot of moths and some butterflies are pests, so they eat the food that we try to grow to eat ourselves. In some countries, caterpillars are a good source of food. They're these nice, juicy little morsels that you can sort of pop in and eat or fry up and put seasoning on. A lot of cultures actually do that. It's a part of their diet. The silk industry, talked about that silk gland that makes the cocoon. The silk moth, the common one, is actually domesticated, and that is what makes a lot of the silk, that really soft fabric. And good PR, good public relations. A lot of people like butterflies. They like to see them in their gardens, and they're sort of good ambassadors for insects as a whole. And they're easy to study because they're big, they're showy, they're real easy to identify compared to other insects that might be small or not as colorful. And they're also a lot of fun for kids to collect, and it's kind of the model insect in the classroom where you can learn about metamorphosis and change and just the different colors and beauty that's in the insect class. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for watching and take any questions. Yay.